Hi, I'm Bjarke Ingels of Big, and you're listening to US Modernist Radio.
Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Oh, I don't care what Mama don't allow, gonna draw mine modern anyhow. Mama don't allow no architecture around here.
Welcome to US Modernist Radio. I'm Frank King, here to introduce a very special show, number 400, celebrating, get this, 10 years of people who enjoy, own, create, dream about, preserve, love, and wait for it, hate modernist architecture, the most exciting and controversial buildings in the world. Joining the show today, get this, actress and modernist homeowner Kelly Lynch, design writer Kate Wagner, clips from some of US Modernist Radio's best shows. That's a short list. I salute the guests who've gone to the great Lautner in the sky, and musical guest Heather Rigdon. So, fellas, what is the deal with modernism? We're talking about buildings designed by people who aced geometry and then somehow immediately got obsessed with concrete and Georgian Tom. 10 years talking about houses. Who does that? 700 guests they've had. Is it a cult? Probably not. They don't have the budget for orgies, automatic weapons, or even the Kool-Aid. George and Tom are still trying to get Brad Pitt, as is every other woman on the planet.
Hey.
Brad Pitt, declared modernist fan, though he's never actually owned a modernist house. Floor-to-ceiling windows, open floor plan, Survival of Channel 5, Goldberg's Eat Dinner. Spoiler alert, they're having Meatloaf naked. No, the Meatloaf's not naked, they are. Look, Carol is wearing go-go boots. She's sitting on the egg chair. Tacky. She's right next to the Formica table. Remember Formica? Whose idea was that? Hey, let's make something cheap that looks like plastic but isn't plastic. It'll be treasured in 40 years. Avocado green carpet? Did someone spill a giant guacamole bowl and go, you know what? This works. And every living room had a bar because apparently drinking at home wasn't drinking unless you pretended you were in a nightclub. Martini. Shaker's not stirred, my little minx. In my living room bar thing. Barcelona chairs, designed by someone who clearly hated lumbar support. I'm guessing a chiropractor who needed a business. You need a pulley system to get out of one of those things. My mother once saw one and said, "This is seating?" And now, the guys who made modernist architecture something wonderful to listen to couldn't be here today, so my friends are filling in. Tom Guile, George Smart.
Wow. Frank, it's so great to hear you back from the past.
Yes.
That's
10 years ago, man.
Yeah. I see that you haven't changed a bit.
No, I have not. And by the way, I'm going to revisit a story we told when I was opening the show with modernist comedy, which is no easy thing to do.
Yes.
I was on a cruise ship doing comedy. I'd finished a show. Everybody had left the theater except one guy comes walking toward me. He goes, "Are you that Frank King?" And I said, "Which one is that? US Modernist Architecture?"
So you had a fan.
Yes.
I did.
Wow.
Absolutely.
Did he ask for your autograph, Frank?
He did not ask for my autograph, but I was flattered that he listened to US Modernist Radio. I guess he was probably my only fan, I suppose. So,
Well, we were paying you a nickel a listener,
Yeah.
so that was a raise.
Well, we only had 7 fans then, so you got 1/7 of the fan base.
yeah, we did start out small, as a matter of fact. Yeah.
Very small. I can remember when I came into this studio to meet Tom for the first time upon Frank's recommendation.
Oh, I did?
Yeah. Yeah, you told me to come here, Frank.
To Tom Guile?
Yeah.
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 Thanks.
Yeah.
Your check's in the mail, Frank. Don't worry.
Thank you.
And I tell Tom that I want to do an architecture podcast. And he goes, "Oh, so are you an architect?" It's like, no.
Well, but you seem to know what you wanted to do. I mean, a lot of people came in here like 10 years ago and wanted to do a podcast, but a lot of them had no clue what was involved. You know, it was a lot of planning and a lot of work, but you were a man with a plan. Like, I think you had about a dozen episodes you wanted to do at first.
Yeah.
And you wanted me on the show.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I didn't know anything about architecture, but you came in with a sheet of paper that you pulled up from your archives about house in Durham. It happened to be my parents' house.
No.
Yes, it happened to be my parents' house in Duke Forest, and it was, in fact, I found out from George, a mid-century modernist home.
And I did not realize that I grew up living in a modernist house. Small.
Milton Small.
Yes, in Drury Hills. The place was chock-a-block with modernist homes. And I didn't realize my first job working for Unigard Insurance in a building on Glenwood Avenue, modernist building.
By Milton Small.
Wow. Wow.
Yes, exactly.
Well, my dad designed our house with some guy named George Birmingham. He was a contractor, and he built a lot of houses in the 60s, and a lot of them were pretty modernist. But I don't know about you, Frank. I never thought my parents' house was special. I just remember that there was one other house down the street that was different. It was a center hall colonial, but I didn't know that. I just thought it was the funny one. Anyway, I just realized that I had something in common with a lot of modernist fans. I liked the style. It felt normal, natural.
And in my neighborhood, across the street, the Richardsons had one that was different only in that it had a basement because of the way the lot sloped down.
Right.
And then 2 doors down, the Andrews had one, which was, I believe, our house, just the floor plan flipped around.
Uh-huh.
So there were 3 within, stone's throw, and there were more down the street on Drury Lane.
Well, I was in the Duke faculty ghetto, so, all the houses there were mid-century modern, except for that colonial. But,
yes, that neo-colonial weird thing down at the end of the street.
Yeah. But,
Yes.
all of this made me realize that I get why modernism mattered. So there was George, and I was an ex-radio guy with a recording studio.
And I was a fan of Tom's. I mean, Tom was the shit on radio in his day.
Well, and you had money. So the rest is history.
And we have also had sponsorship of the show since day one, and we'll thank those sponsors a little later on. So let's dive into our first show, and our first interview with actress and preservationist Kelly Lynch, and we talked with her recently about her memories. Kelly, I just have to thank you. You were our very first guest on US Modernist Radio 10 years ago. Such a good sport for coming on, and such a good sport the year before that because you showed our group around your amazing house in Los Angeles.
Well, it was my pleasure then and now to speak with you. I'm such a fan of U.S. Modernism, what you guys are doing and contributing to the architectural world and preservation. And I'm very honored to be here and talking to you again. It's been fun.
Kelly has been on the U.S. Modernist Advisory Board. She's hosted some events at her home for us, and she continues to be one of the most well-known preservationists in America, with 2 houses, the one she has in Los Angeles, and then another Neutra house that she has in Lone Pine. How long have you had this modernism bug, Kelly?
It's funny. I think I was born with it in a way. When the other little girls were playing Barbies, I was playing modern Barbie house, taking over furniture and boxes and whatever things I could in my house and building these crazy contraptions. And I really thought I was going to end up being an architect.
Mattel needs to come in and produce one of those now that Barbie's all the rage again.
Exactly. I know. The modern 60s Barbie house, I had an older cousin who had that. She had the peach convertible and that modern house. And I could have cared less about the Barbies. They were always nudist Barbies for me. I just threw them over in the corner. But moving the little furniture around in that modern Barbie house, it was cardboard, but it was so cool. I thought, this is how I want to live. I had a very good friend whose dad, Bruce Abramson, was in a firm called Hamill, Green and Abramson in Minneapolis, where I'm from. And he built for the family a steel and glass house that the entire family hated and I loved. And I used to beg to come over and be in their house. And then he would show me architecture books. He could see that I had the bug from the, modern architecture. And I remember looking at all the pictures and seeing in very many of them, the name Julius Schulman was front and center. I somehow thought he was an architect. I was confused. When I came from New York to Los Angeles, I looked him up in the phone book, and there was, and I went to see him thinking he was an architect still. I don't know. I was so confused by that. And we became really dear friends. I used to visit him at his house, and we used to hang out, and I wanted to always talk about architecture, and he wanted to talk about environmental things, and he was so interested in everything. But we were planning on having his 100th birthday at our house, which was, his birthday was 10-10-10.
Oh, wow.
Or as Julius said, how could I not be amazing with a birthday like that?
Yeah. And you were in the documentary about him, Visual Acoustics.
Yes.
Which is now, what, about 10 or 15 years old?
At least, yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Great film, one of the best.
He was just wonderful and very honest about his work. He said, you know, he loves and appreciates architecture, and he lived in a modernist home. But he really thought what his real talent was that he was a salesman of architecture. He knew how to sell it, because he loved mid-century architecture. And he thought at the time when it was kind of happening in those early days that it was very strange for people. And he wanted to show lifestyle and how families could live, or people could entertain, or there'd be a cocktail party going on. Or as my friend Raymond Neutra said, often in pictures of his father's architecture, Raymond was holding a branch to frame the photo to sort of soften the image or something. He said, yeah, there's often a 10-year-old Raymond Neutra's hand out of the frame. You know, he kind of always downplayed his skill. I think it's pretty great to hear that he made the most money he ever made in his 90s and became the most famous he ever was in his 90s. And we had I think it was his 95th birthday party here at the Lautner house that we own. That's when he had left his archives to the Getty, and a lot of the Getty people were here, and it was a big dinner and a lot of toasts. And then Benedict Taschen sent a burlesque performer for Julius. And I can tell you, some of the museum people were really shocked, but Julius loved it. She was amazing. She had a giant champagne glass, like a coupe glass, and things came flying off, and she was rolling around in that thing. And she was always kind of covered, but barely, removing layers and layers of things. And he just was beaming. I mean, it was, Julius,
shocking but tasteful.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, the joy of life that Julius had. I really miss him.
Kelly, tell us about the series you're wanting to develop for PBS on design and architecture.
Oh, great. Yeah, it started as a design and architecture show. And then during COVID, feeling like, we all did that, I was trapped. So I started doing these little road trips with a small crew, a sound person, a producer, a photographer, and basically recorded a podcast called California Trip. At first, I wanted to do architecture, and we included a lot of that. And now it's more than architecture. It's sort of like, for instance, in Malibu, we talked to Crosby Doe, the great realtor, architecture historian, and dear friend of mine, at the Hunt House. So I talked to Crosby about his work as a realtor and, in his own way, a preservationist and a historian of architecture, as well as the story of the Hunt House. We were there with the new owners. So we include things about architecture, but we also include other stories about Malibu, say. So we're going around California and doing a picture of the people, places, and things that are uniquely California. And of course, architecture is a huge part of that, and design. I just find that this state, for whatever reason, attracts such interesting people, many of them not natives, who come here and have these ideas and manifest them. But I also have some serious stories. For instance, Manzanar, the Japanese internment camp, a little north of Lone Pine, California, 10,000 Japanese Americans were interned there during World War II for 4 years. And there are 10,000 different stories. A few of the buildings are still standing. They've recreated the barracks and so forth without any insulation, without any division of rooms. So, for instance, families, there was no privacy for parents from their children.
There's a really well-designed memorial to the Japanese internment in Washington, D.C. that's almost unknown.
Yeah.
It's been there about 20 years, and it's well worth the visit. You can learn the history of this chapter of the American experience.
Oh, that's great.
Kelly, thank you and Mitch so much for your complete dedication to modernist preservation, all the different projects that you're involved in, all the times that you've spoken around California and elsewhere on behalf of preservation. It's a huge gift. We really appreciate you.
No, I appreciate you saying that. I do what I can to keep it going, and thank you very much for your kind words on that.
Also early on the show, we had fun with author Chris Rawlins, whose book about Horace Gifford and Fire Island modernism is now out in an expanded second edition.
The existing architecture was really a pretty drab backdrop for all of this local color. And so it was essentially demand-driven, in which people were pining for something more. And there was one creative architect working on the island in the 1950s. His name was Andrew Geller, himself a brilliant and quirky and interesting figure in his own right. He built about 7 or 8 houses across Fire Island through the 50s and into the early 60s. But then another person appeared on the scene. His name is Horace Gifford, and he built himself a house in 1961, and almost not single-handedly, but is really the ringleader of a handful of really fantastic architects that defines an entire aesthetic and really builds the entire community in a kind of cedar and glass modernist aesthetic. Well, and he knew how to work a good thing. His typical business attire was an attaché case and a Speedo.
Oh, no.
Really?
Where did he put the ballpoint pens?
He was tall, blonde, handsome, charismatic, eccentric, bipolar, and he he had it all going on. He was brazen at times. He got his first Fire Island clients, a male couple, by sleeping with them, and stole the commission All About Eve style from Andrew Geller.
So, Chris, also our crack research team noticed that your name came up under Architecture as Erotica. So we prepared a little tribute to you for this episode. Most of these words are indeed yours. So, Tom, let's hit it.
His architecture was butch, but in its muscular austerity, free of domesticating bric-a-brac, a hyper-masculine form of drag could also be discerned. His occasional incorporation of a vintage porthole window, stained glass, and Palladian transoms offered a wry, backward glance at what the new generation was leaving behind.
Gifford presented the house to the husky Italian, Bonaguidi, as a series of telescopic spaces that got longer and longer, hinting at the spying nature of elongating to capture objects in its commanding gaze.
Gifford's early homes were delicately situated into the landscape, less self-consciously beautiful and more demanding, echoing tumult, both personal and societal. The pointed gables, the thrusting hips, and the powerful arcs of Gifford's early mouth-watering confections gave way to a more abstract vocabulary that relied exclusively upon desire.
No, I think you're paraphrasing.
We did borrow a few words.
Anybody else need a cigarette? Anybody?
Chicago architect and professor Stewart Hicks rocks YouTube with informative and entertaining architecture videos. And we caught up with him to talk about George Costanza's architect alias, Art Vandelay, and Bricks That Talk.
I was trying to figure out where I could meet people on architecture, kind of on their turf or on their own terms. And, George Costanza is a very popular character. So maybe I could present some of the real architecture that he would be surrounded by or encountering while he's pretending to be an architect. So the whole premise of that episode of my YouTube channel is about what kind of architect George Costanza would have been, what office space he would have been in the building that he said he was in. So did a lot of research with that, and then found almost every moment where he had some unique spatial idea, like when he built a bed under his desk, which also had him dealing with a contractor. So there's a lot of data to pull from as far as what kind of architect he really would have been. And so the whole episode takes it seriously, of what he would have been and tries to bring people along for the ride.
Don't you think there are architects who have tried to build beds under their desks since?
I think every architecture student has done that under their desk in school. So
yeah,
it's kind of a rite of passage, I think.
One of our favorite clips was when Stewart interviewed Will Quam.
Yeah, I'm Will Quam. I run a project called Brick of Chicago. I know a lot about bricks.
I reached out to Will because I had a recent epiphany that maybe not all bricks want to be an arch. You see, every architect knows the story about Lou Kahn talking to bricks. Lou Kahn says, you say to brick, what do you want, brick? And brick says to you, I like an arch. And you say to brick, look, I want one too, but arches are expensive and I can use a concrete lintel. And then you say, what do you think of that, brick? And brick says, I like an arch. To see how all this stacks up, Will agreed to introduce me to bricks. So I asked him if he could talk to bricks, like Lou Kahn.
What? I could talk about bricks. I thought I made it clear in my email. You can't talk to a...
So if you can't talk to them, how do you know what it wants to be?
I mean, it's a Chicago common brick. It's a brick made in Chicago. And I guess, that's a piece of limestone, which is ancient seashell. So that was alive. But I can't talk to mollusks.
That's just priceless.
That was really great.
At 100 years old, he's the last living client of Frank Lloyd Wright, Roland Reisley. I got to visit with him in his Wright house in New York.
Chicago architect and professor Stewart Hicks rocks YouTube with informative and entertaining architecture videos. And we caught up with him to talk about George Costanza's architect alias, Art Vandelay, and bricks that talk.
I was trying to figure out where I could meet people on architecture kind of on their turf or on their own terms. And, George Costanza is a very popular character. So maybe I could present, some of the real architecture that he would be surrounded by or encountering while he's pretending to be an architect. So the whole premise of that episode of my YouTube channel is about what kind of architect George Costanza would have been, what office space he would have been in the building that he said he was in. So did a lot of research with that, and then found almost every moment where he had some unique spatial idea, like when he built a bed under his desk, which also had him dealing with a contractor. So there's a lot of data to pull from as far as what kind of architect he really would have been. And so the whole episode takes it seriously, of what he would have been and tries to bring people along for the ride.
Don't you think there are architects who have tried to build beds under their desks since?
I think every architecture student has done that under their desk in school. So
yeah,
it's kind of a rite of passage, I think.
Yeah, I'm Will Quam. I run a project called Brick of Chicago. I know a lot about bricks.
I reached out to Will because I had a recent epiphany that maybe not all bricks want to be an arch. You see, every architect knows the story about Lou Kahn talking to bricks. Lou Kahn says, you say to brick, what do you want, brick? And brick says to you, I like an arch. And you say to brick, look, I want one too, but arches are expensive and I can use a concrete lintel. And then you say, what do you think of that, brick? And brick says, I like an arch. To see how all this stacks up, Will agreed to introduce me to bricks. So I asked him if he could talk to bricks, like Lou Kahn.
What? I could talk about bricks. I thought I made it clear in my email. You can't talk to a...
So if you can't talk to them, how do you know what it wants to be?
It's a Chicago common brick. It's a brick made in Chicago. And I guess, that's a piece of limestone, which is ancient seashell. So that was alive. But I can't talk to mollusks.
That's just priceless.
That was really great.
At 100 years old, he's the last living client of Frank Lloyd Wright, Roland Reisley. I got to visit with him in his Wright house in New York.
When you joined Usonia, you selected a site. We have 100 acres here on which Wright designed, intended 50 home sites. The site plan that he made had 55 circular acre home sites. Circular. And your voice raised question. The whole world raised question. That site plan was published in every newspaper in the United States. The great Frank Lloyd Wright, look what he did here. Circles. Who ever heard of such a thing? The idea was that the circles could not be delineated. We have a covenant that says you can't make up fences or hedgerows or anything else. And the idea was to make these circular acres, which he thought was just about enough, for a house feel as if they're in a much larger space. And that was the intention of no delineation. That he visualized a wooded enclave from one end to the other, with narrow winding roads, not to get you from here to there, but to connect you with the land, and with beautiful houses scattered like jewels. That was the scheme. I have many visitors, as you can imagine, and most of the people who visit me know something about Frank Lloyd Wright. They know with absolute certitude that he was an arrogant, egocentric man, not a nice person. He left his wife and 5 children, ran off with the wife of a client, didn't pay his bills, his houses cost too much, he didn't pay attention to his clients, his roofs leak, and so on. Oh, well, Falling Water, Guggenheim, great architect. No awareness whatsoever of the hundreds of wonderful buildings that Frank Lloyd Wright designed. But this sense of his difficult persona is one that most people who know something about him assume to be fact. Well, we had none of those experiences at all. We got along very, very well with him. This house is decidedly of the land. When we showed Mr. Wright this site in the first place, we thought the house would be at the top of the hill, nice view over the meadow and so on. And he clambered up there and he said, oh, that's ridiculous. That's just a house on a hill. It should be of the hill. And that's an expression he used many, many times. He wanted his buildings to grow out of the land as though they belonged there naturally, be built of natural materials.
Ten years of shows means about 700 guests, and sadly, we've lost some wonderful people. One of those was Harriet Pattison, colleague and lover of legendary architect Lou Kahn, and her beautiful book of his love letters.
You met Lou Kahn briefly in 1953, but it wasn't until several years later that you were introduced through architect Robert Venturi. When did you know that you were in love?
Immediately. And that it would be a lifetime love.
Wow. That's just like in the movies.
Absolutely in the movies. Because of our separations, his travels, and our feelings, Lou wrote to me often, and I kept his letters in my treasure box. Once read, they rested there undisturbed. Like much of my life, they were unexamined, put off for a later time. But it is a later time now, for I am past 90. One day, suddenly curious as the cat that sat beside me, I lifted the lid of the box, and the letters spilled out as if they'd been waiting with their contents eager to be read. And there was Lou, thinking, dreaming, traveling, drinking in the world with boundless enthusiasm and wonder. I found him in every phrase. He was by turn confiding, poetic, funny, and wise. And I remembered the anticipation of opening each of his letters. I found myself inside them, too, young again, in love, and challenged to raise our child on my own and venture on a career. Here is a letter from 1963, written from Dhaka, in what is now Bangladesh, but was then East Pakistan, on his first really great assignment abroad. And he visits the site. This is his first visit. The site is a no man's land, completely without distinction. Not a contour, a cluster of trees, not a distant landmark. I was driven around in a jeep, crisscrossing the site, and all the time thinking of what can make it worthy of the thoughts I had before I saw it. Then at lunch, it dawned on me to include in the assembly group a mosque. This somehow twisted me from the hopelessness of the location. I was sure then that I could design something that could be its own force, and even if an inspiring location would have other spaces suggest themselves, it would not have been as valuable if I had not thought of the mosque. When I presented that afternoon the idea of an axial relation of the assembly complex and a mosque, it was as though heaven descended on the authorities. They thought it was it. I am stunned by the completeness of their approval, because they said, "You have put religion in this capital just what it needed to give the meaning it lacked," unquote.
Before the Beatles, before the Rolling Stones, architect Brian Shawcroft invaded North Carolina and became a legend at NC State, riding around in his Jaguar. The celebrated architect, who never met a martini he didn't like, shared thoughts on then Prince Charles and what it was like in mid-century Raleigh.
To me, he's an amateurish dabbler in watercolors, and that's all.
Oh.
And he has assumed that he's a...
The British Navy is arming the missiles now.
Yeah.
Yeah, there goes your Sir Brian.
And he has been responsible for many really serious, good modern architects losing work in London, especially.
Really?
People in England are somewhat afraid of royalty one way or another, or they admire them, like the Queen, for instance. Sure. But he has already, apart from not having any knowledge of architecture, other than living in palaces, his personal life hasn't been too good either, when you think. So I despise him, actually. I think he's used his position as a Prince of Wales to do a lot of damage, and especially for modern architecture.
Hey, Brian, what was Raleigh like in the swinging 60s?
Well, there were 3 restaurants.
The Canton.
Yes.
Yep.
The Greek restaurant and a German restaurant. Well, and then a friend of mine who was a very good builder here in Raleigh, the Frog and Nightgown, which I designed, was the jazz club, and we had all the jazz greats here in Raleigh.
On Medlin Drive.
Yes, on Medlin, and then to Cameron Village.
And then it went underground. Right.
Yeah. Well, this builder friend of mine, I invited him to the Frog, and they charged him $5 for ice.
Yeah.
That was our brown bagging fee.
Brown bagging was the way you went in those days. Boy, was he upset. Well, most of the social life was with faculty, mostly, both in the School of Design. We struck up a friendship with people in the physics department, and so we had a good mixture there. Different points of view of different things. We did socialize, and then, of course, when grass came into the scene, we were growing our own on a CP&L right-of-way.
You had a crop?
Yes. Then we had a party, and if they'd raided us, there would have been no senior administration at State.
Landscape architect Lewis Clarke remembers the state capital plan, which, if executed, would have made little old Raleigh, North Carolina, the most beautiful state capital in America. But of course that didn't happen, thanks to our legislature. Duh. You can see the plan at ncmodernist.org/resources.
This group of people, the commission as a client and the team who were going to do the work, was absolutely superb. It was almost an enchanted group, a group that you could very rarely put together. And how Governor Sanford managed to catalytically put together such a fantastic group, I don't know. So the theory was you come to work, you immediately go underground and park. And then you go under the underground system or immediately straight up into a cluster of buildings, and you spend the day in a park. So you come out at lunchtime and you can sit around the park. In the cost analysis, we had $14 million for land acquisition.
Okay.
Which is a wonderful figure to me. $12 million for landscape.
That's a good budget for 1965.
You know, so it would have been an absolutely unique estate capital. Well, I think generally it was accepted as being magnificent, you know, a really great plan, as I think it is today, and many wish it had been built. So the chairman of the commission presented this booklet to the governor, who was then Governor Moore.
Dan Moore.
So he promptly decommissioned the commission, decommissioned the Heritage Commission, and appointed the governor and the Council of State as the client.
Okay. And that was like the end?
That was the end, yeah.
Harry Bates graduated from NC State and went on to become one of the great modernist architects in the Hamptons. He also dated my mom.
It's fun, and we do an awful lot of research before starting on something. And I think the thing that attracts a lot of people is that the houses aren't alike. They don't look alike. I remember one of the first big ones that we did. It was really a big house, and these people had interviewed several architects, and they told us after they chose, they said, the reason we chose you is because we had no idea what we were going to get. I thought, that's pretty good.
Actress Suzanne Somers, a household name after Three's Company, lived in the mecca of Palm Springs modernism for decades. She shared stories of Barry Manilow and Frank Sinatra in Palm Springs.
I was on Three's Company, so it was the 70s, and I don't know why, but I walked into a recording studio with a friend one night, and he was just finishing recording. He looked at me and he said, "Oh, you're the other one they make fun of." And I said, "I know, they pick on you and me." I said, "Probably because I wear a chicken suit and you wear rumba sleeves." And that started our friendship. It was common to see Frank Sinatra driving around town in his old beat-up pickup truck and a baseball hat, thinking no one would recognize him. And everybody knew, oh, there's Frank in the beat-up truck and the baseball hat.
Mary Schindler was Rudolph Schindler's daughter-in-law and lived in the famous King's Road house early in her marriage to his son Mark. She was also Groucho Marx's therapist, though she wouldn't talk about that.
His mother was a milliner.
What is that?
She designed hats, women's hats.
Oh, okay.
And you know, at the turn of the century, that was quite an architectural feat, if you think about it.
Because they were
Women
big
had
sculptural hats.
And they wore a huge variety of hats.
And this influenced Rudolph Schindler in his spatial ability.
Well, I think the spatial abilities were there. She probably had them and gave them to him. But the imaginative use of the space was rare. It was a difficult childhood, and his mother had great difficulty separating from him. Just, if you're looking for tensions and so forth. There's a famous story of his father taking him to the movies one day, and his mother having an anxiety attack and sending the police to the movies to rescue her child and bring him back. He was a very outgoing person and very sensitive. If I were characterizing the difference between him and Pauline, incidentally, everybody called him Michael.
Michael, okay.
Nobody called him Rudolph. Sometimes they'd call him Rudy, just in a friendly kind of way, but Michael was what everybody called him. And he had a tremendous sensitivity to people. He could listen to you and figure out what you were interested in and what you wanted. It's how he became so sensitive and built so many different kinds of houses, because he fitted them to the people and what they asked for.
Frank Lloyd Wright is considered the greatest architect of the 20th century, and he remains the only architect most Americans can name at all. We spoke with his son, Eric Lloyd Wright.
Eric, you were a student of your grandfather's. I was wondering how that was for you. Was he meaner to you than the other students, or less mean, or how did it work?
I think he was less mean.
Less mean.
What I want to say is that he spent a lot of time with the students, And he didn't treat me any differently than he did his other apprentices. He didn't like the term student, he liked the term apprentice. And we were truly apprentices because our learning was learning by doing. And we learned about architecture by actually building structures, by going out and supervising, by creating the drawings. All of that was done by the apprentices. It was a really wonderful experience to have him come in the drafting room and sit down beside you. Our stools that we had could always seat up to 2 people. And he would come and sit down beside you and critique your drawing that you were doing of his work. So you were actually experiencing the creation of these great architectural works right before your eyes. Things like elevators, restrooms, and other things, he was always undersizing. They were elements that can be modified to a point that is too much. And of course, the elevators of the Guggenheim are too small. As you say, you do have that compression. You're packed into this little elevator. You go up and you're released under this glass skylight. And it's just a marvelous sense of environment and marvelous sense of the atmosphere around you to have that experience. I'm not always in sympathy with all the building forms that are going on today. A lot of it, I feel, is just to be different, to be unique. And that to be different and unique should come out naturally out of the work. It shouldn't be forced on it. And so much architecture is. Of course, it's interesting your term modernist, because I've always thought of modern means of today, and these houses were designed before today, but they are of today in a sense. But what surprised me was we were starting down that road towards Eichler Homes, and there was the work of my father and Schindler, Neutra, that was presenting what we call modern architecture of today. But that has basically died out. It never really has taken a hold. It's only a few special houses. Architecture really is an act of love, a love of the environment and shaping the physical form of society. It's very important, but it is also an art form as well as a business.
Architect Myron Goldfinger made a career of wildly creative geometric houses in the Hamptons and resorts in Anguilla. Even his own house in Wacabuck, New York, was famous in an Alan Dunn cartoon. Myron talks about James Bond, Lou Kahn, and losing a house to the fire department. So, Myron, what was your life like after Goldfinger came out in 1964?
Well, basically, I was teaching at the University Pratt Institute here in Brooklyn, New York, and you could imagine what it was like with the students. I became the hero of Pratt Institute at that time. But before that, in serving in the Army, when you mentioned the name Goldfinger, before being fortunately transferred to the Pentagon, I served early basic training in Fort Dix, New Jersey. And at that time, being a nice Jewish boy from Atlantic City, I had this wonderful Southern sergeant, and he named me Gold So
no.
That was my first name in relation to the Goldfinger name. He was absolutely incredible, except you could not understand him so much of the time because he was such a unique individual. And the way he would express himself in terms of materials and in terms of basic architecture was incredible. But he would go on, and one would spend hours
And half the time, he was thinking in a world of his own, and absolutely incredible. But the point is, I hope that some of my work rubbed off because of him and because of also our friendship. He became close friends with myself and my wife for many, many years. I had designed a house. People lived for about 20 years and moved off to Wyoming. And they sold it to someone who, after the sale, they made a deal with the local fire department to use the house as a training exercise.
What?
They burned down sections of the house until it was completely destroyed and built a terrible traditional style mega house, which is incredible. But that's what happens.
All right, folks. Clutch your pearls tight, because we're about to hear from some of the haters of modernism. Classicists who want to take architecture back to the founding fathers and their love for Greco-Roman structures. Because we should all continue to do everything like the founding fathers did, right? We'll start with Rhode Island critic David Brussat.
It just occurred to me that modernism and shingles go well together.
We'll have to explore that more.
You mean the medical malady or the roofing material?
I mean the medical malady.
Oh, really?
Okay.
Oh, I get it.
Yeah. Because Nikos Salangaros has written often about the extent to which modern architecture not just disorients people, but makes them dizzy and makes them ill. But I don't think even he has ever suggested that modern architecture causes shingles.
That's good.
I think largely it has to do with two factors. Number one is its general aesthetic sterility, which most people perceive naturally. But there are strong scientific bases for the public's belief that modern architecture is somehow, they have a strong skepticism of it. And number two, I think that largely because of this, and largely because modern architecture is a phenomenon that sort of took over a successful industry of building design and turned it into an unsuccessful industry. That is, it ended up with ugly cities, ugly buildings, and a sort of dour acceptance of reality by the public, which was not overjoyed. Where does the public go when it wants to go on vacation? It goes to places like, Paris or Rome or London, for all its current flaws. It doesn't go to modernist places like Brasilia.
Professor J.S. Curl, another modernist hater, joined us from the UK.
The loathing for any criticism is quite frightening, because the whole modernist thing is like a pseudo-religious cult. I suppose this is the centenary of the foundation of that loony asylum, the Bauhaus. 100 years ago, it was founded in Weimar, and Germany at that time was a basket case.
Yeah.
They were having some issues, yes.
My goodness, how would you like to start every day with an enema?
Was that the practice at the time?
So far, everything's gone fine.
You had an enema and you had garlic paste. So you stank of garlic. This is hardly rational or scientific.
And the man behind the classicist curtain, Catesby Leigh, not a fan at all of modernist design.
For federal architecture, I'm very partial to classical for a very broad array of design, because I think federal architecture should stand apart. It should bear the stamp of federal authority and the idea of a normative architecture for the federal government. So I haven't really thought about what kind of modernist structures the federal government might subscribe to, but I would tend to think they should be more of a utilitarian nature.
So I think, if I'm hearing you correctly, that really the answer to my question here is no, that there really isn't a federal building type that lends itself to the kind of all-out modernism from an SOM or a Saarinen or a Frank Gehry or an I.M. Pei that's appropriate as far as you think?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, that is my take.
Okay.
That is my take.
All right. Well, cool. Very cool.
We've also been so lucky to have some superstars of architecture sit down to chat for a few minutes, starting with Daniel Libeskind.
Look, architecture is not just about building buildings, it's about healing. The power of architecture has always been also the power of healing the human heart and the human soul. And for better or for worse, I've been involved in projects that have dealt with traumas, with catastrophes of history, whether it's the murder of Jews in Europe, whether it is Ground Zero, the terrorist attacks on New York, on the free world, and many other projects. But that's really part of life today. It has always been, today maybe in a different form. And so I've contributed to that sense of what does it mean to address a trauma? How do we overcome it? How do we remember but move forward in a optimistic and clear way? And that's really part of my job. Let's remember this, that to me, architecture is about memory, not just memorials, sites of tragedy, sites of remembrance, but every building, every house. If you are going to be a good architect, memory to me is the key. It's not a footnote. It's the essential part of every site, because beyond the visible aspect of a piece of real estate, there is memory of the place. And without addressing that memory, you would create just, an abstract work. But if you do address that memory, whether it's in a housing project, in a hospital, in a school, in a residential building, in a cultural building, you have to address that site through memory. And that is really my idea of architecture from the very beginning. Not only sites of remembrance, but every piece of housing, every urban site I've done, every house I've done has been based also on memory. And that's the key, because without memory, we have no future. Without memory, we are unable to look forward. Without memory, there is no hope. So memory is, to me, the key, the ground of architecture. There was a kind of naivete in that sense of true optimism. And the beauty of modernism is exactly that, the sense that the world would always progress. There will always be light on the horizon. People would be enlightened, educated. The world would change to the better. But we know that history is not that simple. We see the issues, the Cold War, all the other events that began to sort of interfere with that image. And of course, history is complex, but I think the idea of modernism is right, which is the joy of living, the joy of everyday life, which is not just the nice forms and nice materials used, but it's really the ethics of freedom.
In a noisy hotel lobby in Palm Springs, I loved meeting architect Moshe Safdie.
I would say one of the most sacred spaces, even though it's not a place of worship, that I've designed is Yad Vashem, the Holocaust Museum, which in Jewish tradition, it's almost like a place of burial and therefore treated as a sacred space. And I had two phases there, the Children's Memorial, where I resisted designing a museum with objects and created a place of contemplation where you enter an underground space and a single candle reflects into an infinity of candles through some optical setup that I created there. And after just being there and hearing the names of children read on and on, that names and ages and place of birth, you then emerge to the valley and the light and life.
Yeah. Where are modern mosques around the world? Are there several of those?
Very, very few. There are some, because I researched them.
Yeah.
There are a few, and far in between. There's a few in Turkey.
Turkey? Really?
Turkey. There have been several published. I'm not sure built. It's hard to say these days from the internet what's built. But the far in between, I think Islam is extremely conservative. I have to confess, when I was approached to design the mosque in Dubai, I was shocked. I said, "Do you know what you're doing?" And they kind of looked at me and I said, "Well, I'm a Jew, I'm an Israeli, I have an office in Jerusalem, I have 3 citizenship, Israel, Canada, US. Do you want me to design your mosque?" And they said, "We love your architecture and we think you understand our culture. Yes, we want you to design our mosque. We know all about you," the statement was. When I was commissioned to do the Rabbinical College in Jerusalem, this was 1970, And a modern design, contemporary design, had been rejected by the rabbis before I was commissioned. They asked me in a kind of a threatening tone, will you make a modern building for us or more of a Jerusalem traditional building? And I said, if I succeed, you will not be able to answer the question.
Good answer.
It was defensive, but it worked because it gave me a motto.
Yeah.
The motto then became, I want to do an authentic, contemporary building, modern materials, lightness, but I want it to feel like it's always been there. And I think it does succeed in doing that.
More recently, you've been really well known for a building you designed 10 years ago, and this is because of the movie Crazy Rich Asians. The Marina Sands Hotel, yeah. That movie has been, I think, one of the biggest hits in the world this last year.
Starring my building.
You're starring your building.
I didn't get royalties either.
Did they invite you to the premiere?
No.
No?
No, I never heard of them.
Really?
From them, I mean.
Okay.
I know they got permission to shoot and all that, but I knew about the film when I started getting dozens of emails, a barrage of emails. Have you seen your building? And I have to say the footage of the building in the movie is spectacular.
It is.
It doesn't just show it, it shows its meaning and the life within it in a way that really communicates my intentions in the design. So it's as if they were reading my mind, like they have this shot of the party on the roof and the helicopter backs up and all of a sudden you see the swimming pool and the whole lights of the city under it, 50 floors below. I mean, it got me excited again about it.
He's the last living master of mid-century Palm Springs architecture, Hugh Kaptur, who talks about getting started and his commission for actor William Holden.
Oh, it started when I was a youngster. I'm one of 5 children. And my mother told me that because I was always building airplanes and things, and that I was going to be the architect in the family. So I thought about that. Oh, I might have been 10, 11, I don't know, in there. And I started taking an interest in architecture. At that time, Frank Lloyd Wright was still alive, and he was on TV a couple of times, and I started buying his books and things, and that's what created my interest in architecture. When my secretary told me I had this appointment with Bill Holden, who was one of my favorite actors, I was quite flustered. And so when I went up to his home and rang his doorbell, I was a bit anxious. And Bill came to the door. He opened it. He said, "Oh, come on in, Hugh." He says, "I'm on the phone. I'll be with you just in a minute. Have a seat in my living room here." And it's just like we were old friends.
Sure.
Yeah. Never in my life could I back then could ever imagine that we would be honored the way we've been, the architects. I mean, we were all hardworking, making a living to support our families. And I would drive by some of my projects and look and say, "Yeah, you did a nice job," or whatever. But to the people back then, you'd point it out to a building. "What do you think of that building?" "Oh, that's nice." It wasn't until the gay community really developed in Palm Springs that they took an interest in architecture, and they publicized it and started modernism and things like that. And there was a gentleman by the name of Pat McGrew, and he was one of the leaders in that movement. Since then, there's been a whole group of people who have gotten involved in the architectural movement.
And of course, no compilation will be complete without the unicorn I finally got to interview in New York. The Frank Lloyd Wright of his generation, Bjarke Ingels, who flies me to the moon, where, in fact, he's actively working on projects. I know you lived on the boat for a while, like through the pandemic.
Yes, I converted a Norwegian ferry into a killer home. So the bar has already been set high.
Do you still have it?
I still have the ferry. It's where I stay when I'm in Copenhagen.
Okay.
It's docked next to the opera. So I see the sun rising over Copenhagen, the power plant we designed that you can ski on. And I see the sun setting over the Queen's Palace. Now we have an actual commission to send a 3D printer, essentially a laser sinterer, to the moon by 2026 and construct out of moon dust and solar-powered lasers an artifact. It won't be much bigger than a sidewalk tile, but it will be the first thing ever built on the moon.
That's just fantastic.
Yeah. Working with them and their engineers to be able to build something on the moon has forced us and them to push their technology further and further. Because you can say right now with the gantry crane, it's kind of a very simple, like almost like an old-fashioned inkjet printer in a very large size, like 30 feet long. But you need a pretty plain ground. And even though the robot is printing the house, there's still a lot of manual attendance, insertion of rebar and all kinds of things. And of course, once we go to the moon, it has to be fully automated, and it has to happen in a much less predictable terrain or ground, using entirely locally sourced resources. So locally harvested power from the sun and locally collected regolith from the ground.
Yes, there's a funny cartoon I saw one time where the astronauts are on the moon and the sign on their side of their building says "Buy local."
Exactly. That's the whole principle of lunar habitation, is in situ resource utilization. It's interesting because the Danish word for design is formgivning, which means form giving.
Title of your book.
Title of a book. The reason I think it's worthy to make this little Danish lesson as a way to explain the power of design is because to design something is to give form to that which has not yet been given form. In other words, to give form to the future. Because when you're designing something, a place or a building, you are giving form to the world or part of the world that you would love to find yourself living in the future.
Although this show will never rise to the level of 99% Invisible or Joe Rogan, we do have the best fans, and we're going to hear from a couple of them today, Nick Kruger and Kate Wagner.
Hi, Nick. Welcome to the show. I'm so glad you volunteered to come on and tell us what you like about U.S. Modernist.
I think what I really like most, if I can say one specific thing, is it's the brand of information. It takes these like big, lofty academic social impact of architecture topics and then boils them down into like this very digestible, format while still retaining all of that information. And being able to listen to it while concurrently studying architecture, I think, is very important because it provides a much needed humanity to a lot of the large, big ideas being spoken about in the classroom.
So it's digestible, he says.
Yes, kind of like those space food items they give the astronauts.
Right.
All the nutrients in a tiny amount of space. Now, Nick, where are you in school?
I'm currently in my first year of a 2-year Master's of Architecture program, coming just fresh off of an undergraduate architecture degree as well. So
okay.
At what school?
My current degree is at Ball State University in Muncie, Indiana, and I had my undergraduate at Ferris State University in my home state of Michigan.
Didn't David Letterman go to Ball State?
He did. Do you even know who he is?
I do. The building across the road from the architecture building is named after him.
Oh, good. Yeah. I thought they'd eventually just call it Letterman U, really.
Jim Davis also.
Yeah, there's a few people who are famous for Ball State.
Yeah.
And maybe you will be too someday.
Yeah. What are some of your favorite shows, Nick?
I really liked, the one that really got me going was the second episode on the cyclorama building, because that kind of introduced me to that topic and how, as a metaphor, almost like that was one of the big first widespread modernist preservation cases. And so that's what really kind of introduced me to this whole topic of how big the issue of preservation of modernist buildings is, because prior to then I had assumed it was a very niche topic. Like there were only a few people on the planet that would be concerned about that kind of thing, me included. And so that's what really inspired me to stick around to say and like listen through the rest of the episodes. The Modernism Week ones are always, I guess I could say I look forward to them as I go through chronologically, because they just have such a diverse range of guests that come on. And again, it's about seeing that community that up until discovering the show, I had no idea existed.
Yeah, you got to come out to Palm Springs with us one year and hang out by the pool.
I'm planning on it eventually.
Nick, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Kate Wagner, and I've known triangle modernist houses since I was in high school as a architecture enthusiast in the 11th grade. When I called George and asked him, I said, "Hey, George, there's these cool houses on my street, and I thought maybe you'd like to know about them." I was in Whispering Pines, North Carolina at the time. And ever since then, I've watched as the organization has grown to become many other things, an archive for one of the most valuable archives for those of us who are outside of universities working in architecture. And now I'm a full-time architecture critic, and I've grown alongside it. So congrats to US Modernist and congrats to George.
When we started US Modernist Radio, there were no musical guests. Then I noticed that in every modernist house party I attended, the hosts were playing jazz. Sinatra, Harry Connick, Dave Brubeck, and Diana Krall. About 5 years into our production, we had a few local musicians as guests, particularly Raleigh's hottest jazz band, Peter Lamb and the Wolves. Then one day, I was listening to the Diana Krall channel on Pandora, and this magical voice came on. Sorry, Diana, it wasn't you.
Oh.
It was Heather Rigdon. And I immediately set up Heather as her own Pandora channel, and that's when the magic started. From the nearly 100 musical guests we've had on the show, I've heard them all on my Heather Rigdon Pandora channel.
That's like, what's it, Kevin Bacon? The
6 degrees of Kevin Bacon.
Right.
We've got 1 degree
of Heather
Rigdon. She's been with us on the show twice, and she's back today for show 400. She's been compared to Melody Gardot, and her song Table for Two is in the movie Trust the Man. Welcome back, Heather.
Well, hello, guys. It's good to be here again.
Well, it is good to have you back. You know, the question on my mind, of course, every day when I wake up is, when is Heather's next album coming out? Because I know you've been thinking about it.
Yeah, I think that's the first question on my head every morning in my head. Oh, what am I going to do with all this creative energy? I don't know.
Because you've had a great songwriter, Cliff Goldmacher.
Yes.
Done a number of tunes with you.
Yes, Cliff was my producer for both albums and also shared several songs with me, brought in other writers to co-write with me as well. Pretty much everything I have out there is due to Cliff Goldmacher and his determination, his drive, and his love for music and producing music.
One of the songs that you had from your early albums is called My Mother Would Like You. I found a video of that. I'm not sure if you produced that or somebody else pieced it together, which kind of acts out the plot of the song. Was that you?
It's actually, no. I've always been really impressed and flattered that some fans would take a song and start putting, images to it. We only had one song that I did the music video to, and that was Table for Two. But yeah, if you see anything on YouTube, a lot of that's been created has been fan created and
like fan fiction.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Kind of like it's their interpretation of what it brings to mind.
Yeah.
And early on, I had met Clifford and also Tom Kimmel at a friend's house. In Nashville, there was a lot of writers' rounds after dinner and stuff like that. And I'd met the two of them like early in 2000. They had several songs they had already written, and My Mother Would Like You was one of them. And at the time, they were trailing it as, from a man's point of view, but they were kind of uncomfortable with lines like, call for a date, you're willing to wait, kind of like, here's this man kind of treating this woman pretty poorly.
Yeah.
And so once they met me, they thought, wow, what if Heather sang it? And then it kind of turns it into a femme fatale, like, oh, you're so desperate to be with me. And so it actually ends up changing the entire mood of the song.
Yes, this really resonated with me because in high school, I would desperately try to get the attention of girls. And they would invite me over to their house, and their moms would just be all over me. I mean, it's like, and of course, that's the kiss of death to the girl, right? I mean, she wants nothing more to do with me at that point. So here's Heather with My Mother Would Like You.
My mother would like you. That's a very bad sign. It's only fair I should tell you. I may be wasting your time. Your Ivy League school, your faith in the rules, the cut of your clothes and your hair, your country club style, your boy next door smile. Let's face it, you don't have a prayer. My mother would like you if I ever invited you home. But I won't even tell her about you. It's better she thinks I'm alone. Your sensible heart, your company car. Could anyone doubt you're sincere? You call for a date, you're willing to wait. I guess I'm not making it clear. My mother would like you. That's just the trouble, my dear. Is it so unkind for me to speak my mind? Should I hide behind a veneer? Even if I do, when it comes to you, I can make the truth disappear. My mother would like you. That's just the trouble, my dear. Your sensible heart, your company car. Could anyone doubt you're sincere? You call for a date, you're willing to wait. I guess I'm not making it clear. My mother would like you. That's just the trouble, my dear. My mother would like you. That's just the trouble, my dear.
That's a really cool song.
It is.
You know, just recently, my cousin's son is in Berkeley right now, and he sent a picture of this song to me the other day, and someone in his class is actually using this song right now as a reference mix. They'll want to use a song that hasn't been extremely compressed, or, you know, they want to use something that it really shines through, is nicely balanced to balance whatever they're trying to create off of. And I think it just really speaks to Cliff's talent as a producer that, you know, it still stands up.
Well, speaking of mothers, your parents were Pentecostal. Is that how you were raised? Is that right?
Yes. Yes.
Wow. Which is no music, right? Unless it's classical or something?
Or religious.
Well, in our sect of Pentecostalism, music was probably one of our biggest, I guess, expressions, like way we could express ourselves, but it was gospel. Like it was, full on power vocals of just, you're kind of dancing and singing and clapping. And Church of Christ, I think, is one of the ones with like no music. But this is more of, I think it was the gospel side of things that really gave me my voice in a sense, because of, I was the pastor's daughter. And when I was in choir, if somebody, say we didn't have a soprano show up and they needed somebody to sing high soprano, well, I just jumped in there and I fill in, just fine. Or they needed a tenor and I would go in there and just do that. Wow. So it really strengthened my voice, but also I really think my lungs too, because I think in jazz, sometimes you can really hold out a long note and like really need that power to sustain it. And then being able to manipulate the breath to either break or, trail off and give it a little texture. Most people, when I first came to Nashville, thought I'd like been a cheerleader for years and years because my voice was so, it's true. It was because my voice was so raspy, but it was so raspy because
B-E-A-G-G-R-E-S-S-I-V-E, B, aggressive, B, aggressive.
That's right, because, it was, so to come from a vocal experience where it was very loud and aggressive, like in your face, kind of stuff, and then be in a small little closet with a mic and then learning how to really just speak it and just, deliver it into the microphone, and let the mic do all the work. That was brand new, for me.
Yeah.
For sure. And it's interesting, this song and also the next one we're talking about today, were both some of the first songs I'd ever sung in like a studio environment. It was really an interesting process, like to go through.
Now, does your talent jump to the next generation? Are your kids interested in music at all?
Actually, yes. I think it does. It's funny, when my eldest was in the womb, as it were, I was doing background vocals for several bands at that time. One of the ones was the Black Keys. Another one was Kaleo.
Wow.
So I think that sonic sound, like my eldest has perfect pitch. She can hear it. She can go to it. And she's real earthy and smoky, kind of like me. Like she has a deep voice as well. And then my youngest, who is 7, has a soprano, a high soprano. And she also, we were kind of doing a music company at the time. And we were in and out. I was singing demos for young artists we were producing at the time. And she got the same sonic boom. So, and we're a musical house. There's a lot of times I'm singing in the kitchen and they're hearing that, and they'll come and they'll show us songs. And, each one of them, when they get in the car, they fight over who's the DJ because they want to show me something new, some sound they've heard. So yes,
great.
It's definitely, it's definitely in the water, as it were.
I can imagine. There's that great scene from the movie, I can't quite remember, but it's with Cher and Winona Ryder, where they're in the kitchen, and I think they're singing It's in His Kiss.
Moonstruck.
Yeah.
Moonstruck. There you go. And I can imagine you and your 2 daughters singing that together in the kitchen. That would be a great video right there.
Moonstruck. What a great flick. It's funny because it's something where they'll show me something, and at this point, I'm kind of like, can I still do that? So they'll show me something fantastic, and then I have to I got to try it out, and sing to the rafters. But it's pretty cute. My eldest has started a little band with some of her friends, though. They just met for the first time last Friday, and they're, talking about what instruments they all want to sing. I think they decided they're going to be called Go Crazy is the name of their band. So.
All right.
Okay. I'll look for them.
This next song is Sunday Morning with You.
Sunday morning, slow and sweet, sleepy heads and stocking feet. Not a thing I'd rather do than spend my Sunday morning with you. Coffee table, New York Times, sunlight sneaking through the blinds, cozy sofa just for 2 on a Sunday morning with you. By Friday, so frazzled, we can barely move. We rehabilitate on Saturday till our mentalities improve. Buttered toast, scrambled eggs, Grandma's blanket across our legs. There'll be work next week we'll have to do, but not this Sunday morning with you. Sunday morning, ain't it sweet? Our favorite day comes every week. Not a thing I'd rather do than spend my Sunday morning with you. Spend my Sunday morning with you.
You know, every time I hear that song, I think you should sell that to the New York Times. Wouldn't that be the perfect soundtrack for a New York Times commercial? They could sell millions of subscriptions.
I definitely think they should do it. 100%. That song is kind of the, you know, most of my Sundays were like get up, go to church, Sunday school in the morning, come home for a little while, go back to church Sunday night. And in my adult life, what has been so nice is that it really does capture a moment. I think this song does, because it's like we all know the hustle and bustle of a crazy work week, and then just to have nothing to do. Like one thing I think Cliff and that's Joel Evans, they wrote this song, and Joel Evans does a lot for TV and film. You can really see the artistry of setting a scene, you know, because we've got all the textures. It's very sensual. It's a very sensual song, I think, because you feel the comfort in it, and just having, you know, Grandma's blanket across my legs and toast, and, you know, having the New York Times there, and you can just see the small little.
I can smell the coffee right away. Yeah.
Yeah. I know, it's true. You really can. It's just such a beautiful song, and it's cute because every time I listen to it, there's one part of the song where I say we rehabilitate on Saturday, you know, and you can kind of hear my Texas twang just a little bit in there, because I'm like, on Saturday. You know, it's just a hint, you know, because we had pretty much cleaned the Texas out of the girl for most of the song, but it showed up on that on Saturday. Also, there was a lot of dynamics in that one. I got to really play around because the melody goes, you know, up and down. It's lazy, but it's very close and forward. It's, you know, hearing all the breath, you know, the soft breath. It's relaxing. Yeah, it's still one of my favorite songs.
Yeah, it is great. I have actually played it on Sunday morning, making the coffee, and it works. It's a great tone setter.
Yeah, well, thank you. I do. It was nice to revisit that song and think of the times when it was made, you know?
Heather, you continue to be an inspiration to our music program. We're so glad to have you back. And we'll have you here for show 500.
All right. Well, you guys, thank you again for asking me, and I appreciate it.
People ask me all the time how we produce the show, and really, it's Tom that is the magic behind everything. He comes into the studio and pulls the knobs and turns on the switches, and then goes home to his home setup and does all the editing. And everything that you hear that comes out of that is really good because of Tom. And I just want to express in this show 400 how grateful I am for the privilege of working with Tom over this last 10 years, traveling with Tom, laughing with Tom, eating a lot with Tom, drinking with Tom. It's been pretty superb, Tom. Thank you.
You're welcome, George. I mean, nobody knows this stuff better than you. And I've seen that in the reaction of all the folks that we talk to. You command an immense amount of respect in the world of modernist architecture and architecture in general. And it doesn't feel like it's been 400 shows.
It really doesn't. I know. I feel like I just walked into this place. There's some other people we want to thank, too. Our sponsors have kept us on the air for this last decade. Particularly want to mention Sarah Sonk, Angela Roll, Diane Bald and the Budman family, and June Goldfinger. And then Iva Kravitz was our PR person for a long, long time, was really instrumental in getting us on the radar of important people in New York and L.A. So we thank them very much. And lastly, I want to thank you, our listeners. You are the people that send me emails. You call me, you text me, you post on Instagram. Occasionally you send me something through Facebook. It's always exciting to hear from our listeners. And besides that, it's our privilege to put these shows together for you. We hope they continue to be interesting. We hope they continue to inspire you to preserve the modernism that we have already and create new dream homes for the future.
Thank you for listening, because you're out there, and if we weren't, we'd be having to find real jobs.
Okay, Frank King, take us out.
Visit USModernist.org's massive archives to listen to past shows, discover documentation of 23,000 significant modernist houses and a couple of insignificant ones, and access nearly 5 million pages, Lord, 5 million pages of classic 20th century architecture magazines. U.S. Modernist Radio is produced by Soundtracks Recording Studio in Raleigh, North Carolina. Our theme song was performed by George Smart and Robinson Earl with guest research by Bobby Morris. Nice is her middle name, or it could be Nelda. We really don't know. U.S. Modernist Radio is a production of Modernist Archive, Inc., a nonprofit educational archive for documentation, preservation, and the promotion of modernist residential design. I'm Frank King, and every 10 years, like clockwork, I'll be back with another special edition of U.S. Modernist Radio.
Thank you, Frank.
Thank you, Frank.